Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to you. We are broadcasting this morning from the Transforming Construction Network Plus. The purpose of this webinar is to give you a briefing on our second round for projects. So I'm delighted to welcome you all this morning. In the presentation that you're going to hear today, we're going to talk you through a little bit about the Transforming Construction Challenge, but most importantly, we're focusing on the second round that we're offering for projects. And there are two schemes this time, so there's quite a bit of information to get through. Everything that we're talking about this morning, we have application packs available already on the Network Plus website. And I'm also going to flag a few things to you this morning that hopefully are helpful to you in writing an application. And I'm going to point you towards some information as well. Towards the end of the session, there'll be a chance for you to ask questions and raise queries. And you'll do that through the platform that we're using, GoToWebinar. We'll respond to as many as we can this morning, but don't worry, we'll have a recording of what's going on, so we can get back to you afterwards also. At the end of the webinar today, you'll find that when we close about 10 o'clock, you'll find that there is a survey that pops up on your screen. We'd be very grateful if you could complete that. Don't worry, we will follow up with an email after the event as well. So I'm Jackie Glass. I'm the Principal Investigator of the Transforming Construction Network Plus, and my job really today is to take you through what we're doing on the programme and really to introduce our second round call for funding. Importantly, I'm joined on the Transforming Construction Network Plus team by a group of academics as co-investigators, including from Imperial College, Jennifer White, we have from WMG, Professor Jan Godsall, and from my own institution here at UCL, I also have Andy Davis and Professor Paul Roosevelt. Among our team, we have Lisa Hanselman, our Network Manager, Doreen Plante, our Communications Officer. We have two research fellows, Kel Jones, based here at UCL, and Luigi Mosca, based at Imperial College. Finally, we also have Mireille Kaya, who's a project engineer based at WMG. We're connecting as much as we can with many of the organisations that are within the construction, the transforming construction space, and we're building a community, we hope, for the future as well. A little bit now about the Transforming Construction Challenge. Those of you who took part in our first round for small projects will remember that in our first briefing sessions, we gave quite a detailed few presentations about the challenge, and those are still available on our website, so of course you're more than welcome to revisit those. But just to recap then, this is a major investment. The industrial strategy set out in 2017 some pretty big challenges for our own industry and others, of course, but within the Transforming Construction Challenge, government's setting aside, as you can see, a large amount of money which is gradually being invested and paired up with investments from industry to make change. And it's quite broad. Let's have a look in a little bit more detail. All of the programmes within the Transforming Construction Challenge will run for about 4 years. Our Network Plus is part of this. We're running through most of next year, but other programmes will continue on. We've got the Construction Innovation Hub, the Active Building Centre, and there's quite a large amount of money which is going to research and development projects. And of course, the Network Plus is amongst those projects. Now, the idea is here to make change, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. So transforming is absolutely the word that you need to keep in your minds when you're thinking about this issue. Now, here's a diagram that the director of the challenge, Sam Stacey, shows, and it's quite useful because it explains to you a little bit about the scope of the challenge that we face. If we are to really address some of the major issues that have held back perhaps productivity in our industry, have restrained us perhaps or constrained us in terms of our engagement with perhaps robotics technology or artificial intelligence, Well, look at how broad the scope is in the Transforming Construction Challenge. We've got options here to look at how we deal with information, how we deal with digital information, how we deal with skills, how we deal with buildings, but also don't forget, it's not just buildings, it's the infrastructure around the buildings. You have to think about the whole built environment here. It's hard to keep everything separate, of course. We're talking about the industry as a whole as well. So we are talking about a sector level challenge. So we're talking about the businesses within it, the supply chains, the clients, and of course the users of our buildings and infrastructure. So plenty to go at for researchers and industrialists alike, I think you'll see. So let me just overview a little bit about the Network Plus, for those of you who are not aware. So the Transforming Construction Network Plus, we call it N+, we're really here to try to act as a catalyst, and we're trying to bring academics particularly and industry together to face some of these challenges together, to work together, to collaborate, and hopefully deliver some very interesting forward trajectories in terms of research and development. So we're an academic-led programme. It's no coincidence that within UKRI, we're being looked after by the Economic and Social Research Council. And I think that tells you a lot about the interdisciplinarity that is expected of our programme and how we are expected to work, bring people together and collaborate. We talk about systemic problems, and we absolutely mean that. Here is an opportunity then to really tackle some of the challenges that we face. We've been busy. We started last November, and as you can see from the statistics, we're getting a lot of very positive engagement. We're running a range of events through our programme, and I have to say it's been very positive in terms of the reaction that we're getting. Many people have been engaged, many disciplines, and you'll be pleased to know many businesses as well. Just to give you a flavour of the sorts of things that we've been doing, what we've been trying to do in our programme essentially is bring people together. So we've run 2 discovery days already. We've focused on manufacturing and supply chains, because we know not everybody within the built environment academic disciplines has got a great deal of exposure to those areas. And if we're to industrialise our industry, the construction industry, as some people believe we should, look, there's some opportunities here, but we need to understand these domains to make the most of them. We've also been really gathering in amazing international academic expertise. And in our first webinar, we hosted Daniel Hall from ETH Zurich and Wei Pang from Hong Kong University. Now, the point of doing that is because not all the expertise resides here in the UK. We are really keen to bring new information to you. On the day of that webinar, Jennifer White did a great job of bringing those speakers together, because her own research in systemic innovation is really influencing the forward path of many people within innovation studies. So we're really keen to connect you with leading research and researchers. Only last week, we held a major conference at the Royal Society, and you can see an image here on your screen right now. We had an array of speakers, and we previewed the small projects that we funded through round 1 of our programme. Debate was good, very positive feedback so far. We'll be having another one of those conferences next year, and thank you if you attended. So let's go back a step before we get into round 2. A little recap on what happened in our round 1. We have 2 rounds, of course. So in our first round, we were extremely pleased by the response from the community. We received 77 proposals, and you can see there the scale of people that were involved. I was absolutely delighted to see so many people really putting in very positive proposals to work together, to make new collaborations and try to tackle some of the challenges that I've already outlined. Now, interestingly, 85 industry partners came forward to join in. Now, that wasn't mandatory, and that tells us a lot about how engaged the scholars are within the built environment disciplines. We've put some details on our website about the 4 projects that we were able to fund. These were the top rated projects by peer reviewers and our strategy board amongst those 77. And the titles of those projects are shown on screen now. You can see that they cover a lot of the space that the Transforming Construction Challenge has to cover. They cover everything from digital information and design. They cover industrialization and manufacturing technologies. They also cover building performance and user experience. And we're really excited about the prospects for those particular projects. As I say, you can read more detail on them on the Network Plus website. So moving forward, some of the inspirational themes that we used in our first round will remain the same for round 2. Clearly, we are responding to the core themes within the Transforming Construction Challenge. This is all outlined on the website and on the TCC website as well. But within the Network Plus programme, we really are looking for certain things. We're looking for academic-led projects. We are looking for interdisciplinarity. And there's a phrase that many people use, which is shift the dial. And this is important. We are not looking for incremental change. We are looking to fund people who are willing to take a step forward. They are willing to just go out of their comfort zone, work with different people, and maybe do things a little bit differently. Set a path, ideally, for new strands of inquiry and research. So, round 2. Importantly, we have 2 strands, and I will really explain those in just a moment. But the timeline for both schemes that we're offering is the same. You have until 14th of November to prepare your application, and we'll be on hand all the way through if you have any questions. We've got a link for you later on and an email address for you to contact us. We're going to turn around the assessment process as quickly as we can so that before the Christmas break, the outcomes are known, and we will press on quickly into the new year so that people can proceed to their projects as soon as possible. The process is this, and we're often asked about the process. This has been developed in collaboration with the Challenge, with ESRC and UKRI. We will do a desk review because we need to check proposals are robust and comply with our basic requirements. We will seek suitable peer reviews, a minimum of 2, potentially more if there are particular queries, but there'll be a specific panel meeting and a ratification by the strategy board. And you can see on our website the people who are on our strategy board, and you'll see that these are influential and experienced people from across industry, and it's important that they have a say and an input to the projects that we're able to fund. So unlike round 1, we have 2 schemes to offer you this time. Like round 1, we offer small research projects, but we have a new programme for early career researchers only, which is discipline hopping projects. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through each of these schemes one at a time. So for the small projects, those of you who saw our information last time will recognise some of this. Now, for this time, we have a very congested programme in the Network Plus. It's very important that we fund projects and that they conclude within our funding period. So this time, the maximum duration is 6 months. So we've adjusted slightly the maximum value per project that you can request, and it's £75,000 at 80% FEC. These must be led by a university. As I said before, the Network Plus is academic-led. It's not an industry-led programme. There are other calls out right now within the Transforming Construction Challenge area being led by Innovate UK, and they are CR&D calls. They are demonstrator calls. Those are industry-led programmes. We are academic-led programmes. We're going to, because of the amount of money that is available and the duration, we are going to restrict the number of co-investigators to a maximum of 3. And I would strongly suggest that these should be a complementary mix of co-investigators. I'll explain more in a moment. Interdisciplinarity is key. You need to demonstrate this very clearly to us. And then in terms of technology readiness levels, TRL, I'd recommend that if you're not familiar with that term, you investigate it. We would support activity between TRL 3 to 8. So that's not fundamental research, and it's not immediately close to market research and development either. It's in the middle. The criteria that we're judging projects against are the same as round one. And many of you who have prepared proposals for one of the research councils will recognise these. Within the application pack, you'll see a detailed breakdown of the sub-criteria that we're using to score all of the applications that we receive for small research projects. And I'd really recommend that you have a close look at all of those. If you have any queries at all about the terminology, please do ask. But this time, we have a broad call, of course, but there are some particular areas and particular questions that we'd like to just go through with you today, maybe to spur some different thoughts, maybe to sort of spur some conversations and discussions within your own networks and your own groups before you prepare your own applications. Now, the reason that we've set out a few areas is because not specifically because we only want to fund within these areas, but we're looking for projects that particularly respond to these questions. So to some extent, they're rather generic, but let's go through them and see what you think. Value is very important. Now, how you define value is one thing, but really, how are we creating value in our industry? How do we know where it is? Who captures it? How is it transferred? Now, it's possible that in other sectors, there may be different ways of dealing with value. There may be different ways of understanding it. Why are we talking about it? Well, there are critics of our industry who believe that we are ultimately held back by the cyclical nature of our industry. And that's preventing us from gaining the value that's there to be had. So there are some questions for debate around value. And here's a big one. Many of you and your colleagues have been researching innovation in construction for a long time. But really, let's have a think about radical and disruptive innovation. We're not talking about incremental innovation here. This is really important. If you look at the latest innovation literature, systemic innovation literature, you'll see that there is work going on about the relevance and the role of digital technology within disruption and innovation. So there is a real point here where you need to engage with the current literature and really pick up on current debates, not those of many years ago. We use the phrase golden thread, and some of you I know will be very familiar with this, but not everybody. Now, the term golden thread in the recent times really has been used by Dame Judith Hackett, and this is to do with information. So how do we respond to this idea of golden thread? Protecting information, moving information through a project structure, through organisational and firm structures and supply chain structures, such that the information remains with integrity, with robustness. Now, there are various ways that you could respond to this query, this question. We would very much like people to engage with this. But let's think about firms as well. We have an industry peopled and staffed by many different types of firm, including a lot of small ones, SMEs, small and medium enterprises. Remember, that category covers up to firms with 250 employees. So SMEs make up a large number, 90% perhaps, of our industry. So if we start looking at disruptive and radical innovation, what is the small company of the future going to look like? How would they cope? How will they adapt? Will we see new emergent SMEs? There's some really interesting conversations to be had about the nature of the construction firm in the future. And here's one that you would possibly like to engage with your colleagues from business schools, from management areas. There is a whole wealth of literature out there on business models. And when we say business models, we're talking about the business model of the firm. We're not necessarily talking about the structure of the industry, and we're not talking about projects. So be clear, if you want to think about business models, delve into that literature. And I'm delighted to say that we'll have a new resource for you coming out soon to help you access that literature and understand the debates that are going on. But project delivery models are a big point of debate. If you think about mega projects, if you think about the management of projects, this is a live area for research across the world. And there's some fantastic work going on. But remember, projects are undertaken in other industries as well. So maybe there's an opportunity to look at how projects are delivered in other sectors and learn from those. And finally here, let's not forget supply chains. Whatever they mean to a project, to a firm, we're reliant on them in our industry to deliver the buildings and infrastructure that we inhabit. So what can we learn from perhaps digital technologies within supply chain management? And if you're interested in this area, there's a strong opportunity to collaborate with people who are from the logistics side or the supply chain management disciplines, perhaps even computing sciences. But there's an opportunity here, I think, to draw in expertise from other sectors. So I think those give you a few clues as to the areas that we're particularly interested in this time around. And let me move on then to the second of the two schemes, which is the discipline hopping program. And this is specifically for early career researchers. And you'll find in the application pack for this scheme that we use a specific definition for early career researchers, which has been agreed with ESRC and UKRI. Now here, we're looking to fund a number of projects. We're looking for durations of projects between 3 and 6 months, but we're only able to allocate £25,000 at 80% FEC to each project. This should be sufficient because we're capping this, obviously in terms of time, but we're also geographically restricting this program to hopping within the UK. If you're keen to travel to overseas institutions, there are other schemes available around the funding landscape. And we think there's enough opportunity to learn from colleagues in other universities, in other disciplines, in other schools, and have that opportunity to bring that expertise to what you're doing. The criteria are shown on the right-hand side of the screen now, and you'll see they're very similar to the small projects call. But with this particular program, I really want to explain the mechanism, because some of you might not be familiar with the idea of discipline hopping. So here's a very simple diagram. Imagine if you are a construction management academic and you're really interested in robotics, perhaps, but within the school, the university that you work in, perhaps there's not a leading robotics group. So you approach with perhaps support from senior colleagues, you approach another UK institution and you seek to be based, immersed in that environment for an amount of time, and you have targeted activities that you're interested in, you have perhaps targeted objectives that you're really interested in, and you develop a short program of work that enables you to really efficiently and effectively absorb the knowledge and the practices of another discipline, bring them back to your own discipline, possibly share them with colleagues. But importantly, if we can offer this program for early career researchers, there's a much greater chance that as ECRs, you will absorb this knowledge, adapt your practices, and sustain that through your career, thereby creating collaborations of an interdisciplinary nature early on and keeping them and keeping with that mindset. And that's exactly the sort of thing that we're looking for people to do here. In the application pack, we've written up a few examples to give you a clue and some ideas about this. but we're more than happy to liaise with people if they have questions. EPSRC, the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, has used this programme before of discipline hopping to good effect. So with both programmes, both schemes that we're offering, please, this is an academic-led programme. You must have a strong research underpinning, a good question, a good problem. Please be driven by the literature. Use references in your application, but take care. There are some very specific exclusions, and these are in line with all of the funding which is being allocated at the moment by the Transforming Construction Challenge. And you'll find them on page 6 of the small project proposals information. There are specific exclusions around skills, around particular types of innovation. There is a specific exclusion around retrofit. So please do take care to read those. I'd also remind you that there are some eligible and non-eligible costs. Now, some of this is required of us by our funders, but also because of the timing, we don't have enough time, for example, to enable people to recruit new staff. So one of the requirements that you will see on the documentation is that everybody must be named. You must be ready to work on these projects. Last time we noticed that not everybody had quite the same level of detail in their impact section. If you've never visited the Fast Track Impact website before, please do so. Take a few moments of your time, because there are some super resources on there for academics to help them write good pathways to impact. This will help you with other applications as well. And finally, pay attention to our checklist, and you'll find that on the application forms. And it's just a little reminder of the main things that you really mustn't forget before you submit to us. So on screen right now, you'll see the email address for our shared mailbox. And what we'd like you to do is address any of your queries to that so that we can respond to them as quickly as possible. What we'll do, if we are not sure how to respond, we'll seek advice from ESRC, UKRI, or indeed the Challenge team of Transforming Construction Challenge. If you've not already joined our mailing list to hear the news of what's going on, please do so, and you'll see the website there. So I hope that's been reasonably useful for you, give you a few tips on what we're doing in this round 2 call. What I'd like to do now then is start responding to some of your questions. Can I make sure that you write into the GoToWebinar interface, please let us know your name, title and organisation when you're asking a question so that we can best respond to them. Last time we had lots of questions and we couldn't necessarily respond to everything on the day, even when we were in the room with everybody. So what we're doing is we're recording all of these queries and we will come back to you. Remember that we have an email address as I showed you on the screen, and you can contact us at any time through that address. So let's have a look. I see there's lots of questions come in. Thank you very much. So now someone's asking about questions, and is there a frequently asked questions? Well, actually, we've got an FAQ document now, and that's up on the website. Now, we'll be updating that as we go along, because obviously some of you are asking questions, the answers to which would be useful for many colleagues. So as and when we have answers, we will update that document. Got a question here, and this is, can an academic lead on more than one application? So I think that's a really good question. So the first thing that we're going to look at is that we're going to look at the quality of the proposal under all of the criteria. And you must remember that every proposal will go to a different set of referees. So the referees, the reviewers, won't necessarily see that an individual is listed on 2 applications. To a greater extent, it's a question for you. Have you got enough time to write 2 good applications? And importantly, in the off chance that you're awarded both, do you have time to manage them both in the time available? So I would push that question in a way back to the person that's asked that, to have a really good think. Can you really deliver more than one? But another question here, will the Network Plus accept applied research projects that involve the development of prototype applications? So I'm thinking that this is like a web application or an iPhone application, rather than a prototype in terms of an object. So prototype applications, in principle, they come within the technology readiness levels 3 to 8. But remember, this is research. So my question to you would be, what is the underpinning research question that you're asking? So in developing an app, you might want to think about what research, what research area, what field does this link to, and what am I going to do after I've developed this app? What is the research trajectory for the work? I'm also seeing a query on here about eligibility of institutions to apply. If your institution is eligible for UK RI funding, you are eligible to apply. If you have a query about that, we can always seek advice from ESRC and UKRI. So we're more than happy to help with that. Question here about engaging academics from outside of the UK. That's absolutely fine. Now, if you would like to bring in a project advisor, if you would like to fly them over for an event, or if you would like to have them involved somehow, we have no problem with you drawing in external expertise. However, we can't allocate funding outside of the UK, but sometimes individual scholars have different arrangements. So I'm conscious that you may be thinking of a particular person, and of course they may already have a connection with the UK university, even though they're residing outside the UK. So it may be that for that particular person who's asked the question, could you perhaps drop us an email and tell us a little bit more about the person's circumstances? But in principle, if there's expertise there and you think you can make a good case, we'd welcome it being drawn in. And now here's a question about discipline hopping. Does the research project need to be construction focused, or could it be outside of the domain with learnings being applied to construction later? That's a really good question. So for me, this is the issue of relevance. If you can make a case to say, actually, here is a study, for example, let's look at social movements. If we look at how social movements develop and form, perhaps there's an opportunity to study social movements within a social policy unit, perhaps, and bring later that knowledge back into construction. But you'd need to show in your application how you intended to do that. Now, I just want, at this point, while I'm just waiting for the questions to reload, to remind you at the end of the webinar that there'll be a survey come up for you to fill in, and we would appreciate your feedback. Importantly, we're really interested because, of course, we still have quite a lot of forward program through to next November. So we're quite happy to be influenced by the things that you need or the things that you'd like to see. Here's a question then about a small project. And it asks whether we can recruit a postdoctoral research associate for 6 months. Well, given that we have effectively less than £75,000 per project, you need to look at how much recruiting and having a PDRA staff on your project would cost. But importantly, you need to name the person. There is no time for you to recruit a member of staff using the usual, if you like, HR processes. We don't have time to do that. There are very fixed start times to these projects, so everybody has to be mobilized and ready to go. If you have queries about how to cost your staff, then you need to speak to colleagues within your school or your department about preparing research costings if you've not done that before. Here's a question then. If we are successful in our application for discipline hopping, how will the funding be awarded? Will it be a lump sum, or will the money be drip fed? And how will you assess accountability? What a great question. Thanks for that. So the first thing to do in terms of funding awards is that we will contract directly with the lead organisation. So wherever the ECR is based, there will be a single contract between UCL, because that's where the Network Plus funding is held. There'll be a single contract between UCL and that host organisation. What we will do in that is agree a payment plan. And we're usually doing this quarterly. And this is a normal way of operating, of moving funding between universities. And the successful award of each stage of that funding is on submission of a report. And we have a reporting template, which is actually being used across the entire Transforming Construction Challenge landscape. And this is about updating us on what you're doing, who you're engaging with. We've developed it in consultation, and we're using it with the small projects that we're already funding. And this is about keeping us up to date of your progress, and then funding will be awarded quarterly. This is quite a normal way to do things. Questions coming in thick and fast here. This is great. I think so this is a question here. I think in the previous call, ECRs were not allowed to lead a project. So let's be really clear here. There are two schemes on offer: small projects and discipline hopping. For discipline hopping, we're expecting to see an early career researcher in pole position, if you like, in the driving seat of a proposal. They're smaller amounts of funding. We would expect a mentor to be with the early career researcher, but on the effectively the larger projects, the 75K projects, we are more than happy for an early career researcher to play a significant role as a co-investigator on the project. However, we do require somebody who is not an ECR to be the principal investigator. Here's a great question about ethics. The ethics permissions process can be quite time consuming. Should we be getting this underway before we hear about the outcome? Well, you know, every university's processes internally can be a bit different. Some of them actually require you, when you are developing an application, they require you to engage with an ethics officer or start thinking about how you're going to deal with queries or ethical issues and ethical concerns within your work. Others would expect you to complete a checklist along the way. I think the best advice there is to consult with colleagues and see what they advise. ESRC would certainly suggest that you pay attention to the ethics guidance on their own website, and I have to say there's some very good information on there, and that will help you to write the application in light of potentially dealing with ethical issues along the way. There's a question here about technological innovation. Is there a preference towards applications which deal with social innovations equally welcome? We are, as I said earlier, it's no coincidence that we're supported by the ESRC. We are absolutely looking for social scientists to be involved in our programme. We are absolutely looking for strongly underpinned social focused research. So absolutely, they are equally welcome. Here's a good question about secondments. Will it be acceptable to have a member of staff seconded to the project from an external organisation? Well, ultimately, it's kind of how you would like to do that. Clearly, many projects would have a project advisory board, or they might have project partners involved. That's up to you to develop that idea. And what I would suggest, when we've put in the application pack, there's 10%, you can request up to 10% of the funding to spend on consultancy or external bodies, some form of advice, if you wish to do so. So it may be that you're able to pay that person. Some people will have their own mechanisms of funding a secondment into a university. So it's a little bit, it does rather depend on the circumstances for that individual and for that organisation, I would say. Here's a good question about the small projects. Can they fund extensive literature reviews? My instinct on that question is to say no. This literature reviews are not really what we're looking to support. We would expect to see strong outputs. I would say it would be quite difficult to respond to all of the assessment criteria purely based on literature review as a methodology. For example, how are you going to achieve impact? So I would on the side of caution with that. Think about small work packages, think about Delphi workshops, think about small surveys, think about ways in which you are going to collect primary data rather than rely on the effectively secondary data of a literature review. Good question here, how is IP managed? So I presume that's intellectual property. How is intellectual property managed if there is an industrial partner and an academic organisation? Well, as I said before, we will contract directly with the academic organisation leading the project. It is their responsibility to develop a collaboration agreement with any partners that they choose to work with. We will not issue a multi-party agreement. We have fairly clear terms on how IP is managed within our contract directly with the project, with the lead organisation. And if you email us directly, the person that asked that question, we'd be happy to share those clauses with you so that you can pass it on to your research contracts colleagues. I don't think they'll see any great surprises in that. So let's have another question here. Let's see. I think we've covered quite a few of these. There's so many coming in. Here we are. Discipline hopping. Is there a preference for multiple universities, or would hopping to another department in the same institution be equally considered? Well, it's a bit difficult to give a general answer to this because, you know, the justification for where you hop to is obviously, first of all, based on your own track record, experience and interest, the problem that you're trying to look at or consider, and then the credentials and the ability to host of the place that you're heading to. My instinct says that hopping within the same institution, whilst it could be easier on the ground, might actually not give you enough headspace to actually focus because you'd be almost too close to home. So whilst I certainly wouldn't rule it out, I'd expect to see some strong justification of why that was the best place that you could head to and how you're going to ensure that you can draw a line between one part of your role and what you're trying to do in the discipline hopping. Oh, here's a good question about funding. Is it possible to bring in additional funding from a partner to help support some of the activities? Oh, yes, absolutely. That's entirely up to you. I mean, if you would like to do that, you feel it would be supportive. I think when we look at the assessment criteria, we look at partners and the team that you've put together, we're looking at additionality. Now, additionality doesn't necessarily mean money, of course. It means support, access to data, all sorts of different things. But yes, of course, if you are working with a partner already, perhaps they want to commit to doing something specific, write it into your proposal, but just be aware that we will not contract with them directly. It will be up to you, if you're successful in your organisation, to contract and suitable arrangements with that partner. The hopping exercise. Yes, indeed. A very good question here. The discipline hopping exercise, when does it need to take place? As some people will have teaching responsibilities until May. Absolutely. Now, we've had a good think about this before we chose to use this scheme. So what we were thinking is that if we launch this program now, people have the opportunity within a 6-month period to do their hop. As an individual, people need to work out whether this is feasible for them within the 6-month period. We cannot fund things which happen outside the project period. That's a requirement. So you'll need to liaise potentially with your line manager and your, perhaps in terms of workload, to consider when you are free to do the hop, whether you might do it in a 1-month concentrated period. And my view, this has got to be immersive. So popping over to another university for half a day a week is just not going to give you the immersion that we're looking for. So perhaps there's a way of negotiating a period where you can be away for a couple of weeks at a time. This will depend on individual circumstances. Here's a great point that everybody will be interested in. What end of project outputs are you looking for, and how will findings be disseminated? So I can certainly tell you first of all what we do here in the Network Plus. We are liaising directly with all the projects that we fund. We're liaising with them in terms of how they're running their projects, giving them extra support. We're promoting what they're doing. We're advising them on their potentially their communications. We're inviting them to events. We're actually coordinating with big external industry events to give them a space on the platform to speak about their work. So we're very much engaged to support the projects that we're funding. Now, end of project outputs will of course depend on the individual project, but typically for a 6-month bit of activity, what we would expect is people to have perhaps a journal paper, a policy report. For some people, it would be a conference paper. It does rather depend on your discipline and what is reasonable within the time frame, but it does need to be targeted. So we're more than happy to speak to people on an individual basis about what might be appropriate for their level of ambition and perhaps where they are in their career as well. So I've got time for a couple more, I think. Let's have a look. Oh, here's a nice one. Would it be okay to work on a detailed case study to test the concept if wider lessons can be drawn from it? I would say yes. Let's have a little bit of a look at that though. Case study method is a research method that many people will have used and that they'll be familiar with. If you are choosing to do a case study and use case study method, then all of the same requirements apply. We need a strong research question. You need to have a sensible methodology for doing that. You need to have clear outputs. You need to think about what the impact will be. All of the projects we're funding, we're expecting people to tell us what they intend to do in the future. So the key thing here would be if you would like to do something with case study method, absolutely fine, but where is it going to lead you? What will it enable you to do differently? And let's have a look at this one. Oh, financial performance of companies. Can we rely on methodologies such as panel data if we want to show financial performance of construction companies? There are many sources of data, and obviously I appreciate if you're looking at performance data, you might want to draw in data like that. Question that I would have to you is, what is the underpinning research? Of course, quantitative and qualitative researchers are more than welcome to apply, but let's try and unpick then what you're interested in doing and what your research question is. For me, that would be the critical component to that. And oh, here's a really good question. Shifting the dial. Great. Are you open to researchers shifting the dial on traditional methodologies for example, using ethnographic or other softer qualitative work? Well, the first thing I would say is qualitative work is pretty hard in some instances. I certainly wouldn't call it soft. But ethnography, absolutely. Methodologies, we are essentially agnostic on methodology. This is all about the research question and the problem that you wish to investigate. It is up to you in your application to make the case, the justification, the argument, the referenced argument as to why you want to use a particular methodology. If you're interested in ethnography, there are books on ethnography on construction sites. I think there are plenty of different methods that we could deploy. And perhaps actually this is the right time to look at those, because you've only got 6 months on those projects. So perhaps this is the chance to actually test something out. So we've not got much time left. And really it's time to just say a few closing words, I think, enable you to get off to the rest of your day. We've tried to set out in the application packs as much information as we can to help you prepare a good application. We're very optimistic about the number of applications we'll receive this time, and we would encourage you strongly to get in touch, use the email address to ask queries as you go along. When I reflect on the applications that we received, let me tell you some good things that people did and some gaps. The good things that people did was that they included references. They showed a very clear connection to academic debates. They showed very clearly that they were in touch with the discussions going on in their discipline. The good public proposals really showed that they were making an effort to be interdisciplinary. And they sometimes surprised us about how interdisciplinary they were. And that was great. People really trying something different. That was very positive. Where people fell down last time is that they were trying to do something which was already in industry. It was already being used. It was already commonplace. It wasn't really new. It wasn't really novel. So there's a challenge there. Where people also fell down is on impact, as I said earlier. Pathways to impact are super important in a program like ours. Last time, many people emailed us about scope. They asked us, is my project within scope? If you have any doubts whatsoever about whether your project is in scope, please email us. We can tell you straight away if it's in scope. The last thing we want is for you to be ploughing on with a proposal which is fundamentally out of scope because we can't fund it. However, we will give advice. And in the last round, we were able to help people a little bit to direct them to other funding streams that were potentially more applicable for what they wanted to do. So we'll try in good faith to do that again this time around. So it's pretty much time for us to close. I'd really like to thank you for joining us today. This webinar has been recorded and will be available for you to watch again and share with colleagues should you wish to do so. So please keep in touch with us. And as I said earlier, the survey will come up on screen when we close today. The Network Plus continues through till November of 2020. So we're really happy for you to join our mailing list, encourage colleagues to do so, and keep in touch with us. The slides that we've used today will also be made available. So thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we hope to see you in person at some point at a future Network Plus event. Good morning.